Hello and welcome. I am delighted today to be talking to Rob. Rob, you may or may not recall, is an HR professional. Rob and I have known each other for many a year and have worked on some various projects together, some interesting escapades. And as I said before, we don't always agree on things, which is, for me, great. It's a great pleasure. It's good that we don't all think alike. And some things we do agree on. And one of those things, and I didn't realize that Rob felt this way until recently, is about working from home versus working in the office. Don't know what you think about that, but Rob, welcome. And do you want to give us just a quick summary of who you are and then tell me what you think about working from home versus working in the workplace?
Thanks, Mike. Very briefly. So I've spent the last 25 years or more actually working within sort of a blue chip organization and latterly working sort of in more of an interim capacity, Mike. But the majority of my career has been working within an office. Huge amount of travel, obviously, within that because I was in an international role, but a lot of working in an office. And certainly, one thing I noticed early in my career was the amount of time that I needed to spend in an office in order to learn from other people that were often older, wiser, but not always older and wiser, but just different backgrounds and experiences. And I think what I've learned over the last number of years, particularly since the COVID period, is this obviously recognition that we could work from home, but the fact now I strongly believe that actually we work much more effectively in an office environment. I think we learn more effectively, and maybe we can touch on some of these other areas. But I think the conversation's been very narrow. It's been framed around flexibility, and I think what we lose is all the intergenerational understanding, the value of experience, both young and old, but also for younger people coming in and how do you actually learn about how an office and an organization works. And people talk a lot about culture, and I think a culture is, as someone once said to me, it's really how things get done around here. And it is around, if you're not around each other all the time, how on earth do you really live and breathe or understand the culture? So I think, as I say, I'm a strong believer that the office is where we should be working. Of course, there's room for flexible working, but I think it should be first and foremost in the office, and I'd like to see a return to the office environment with a little bit of flexibility, but definitely the focus being more in work in the office around each other rather than working remotely. And I think it's good for our well-being and our learning, but I think it's also just it allows us to divorce the home where relaxation and maybe fun should be, and the work environment where we are working on maybe some challenging task, and but we're working together, and it fosters creativity and collaboration also. But I think it's the learning and how you build that culture up, and I think you don't have that culture if you're working just on Teams calls. So maybe a slightly longer answer to your first question, but I feel pretty passionate about it. I think we've definitely lost something, and I think we need to come back to that point of one day a week maybe working from home, not 3 or 4 days, or even having to encourage people to come in with pizza and silly drinks or whatever in order to encourage people. I mean, the work is where we should be doing the learning. So yeah.
No, thank you, Rob. And upfront transparency and honesty, all of that is music to my ears, but I'm not someone who right now is working from home. There are things that I can do at home, of course, quite a lot of
Sure.
things, but for me, the bread and butter has always been with people
Yeah.
in the room, in situ. And well, you touched on an awful lot there, and so much of it was like there was a little bell ringing in my head, thinking, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I do believe that you need that. However, before I talk about that or respond to what you said, it is important to recognize that I do know a few people who work from home and they love it. And they, of course, in fact, trying to think, yes, everyone who I know who loves it is, it is probably in contrast to the fact that there was a bit of a commute. For some people, a rather long
Mm.
commute. For other people, relatively short, but still a reasonable chunk of time out of the day. So they can use that time to go to the gym, to, I don't know, go for a walk, get that hobby up and running that they always wanted to get up and running. In other words, there's a time thing and there's a relaxation thing. And for some poor people who I also know who've got horrendous or had horrendous slogs and a huge amount of expense to get in and out of work, I do see that. I do recognize it. And I think that, therefore, no doubt there are exceptions to the rule that we've just come up with, that
Mhm.
working
Yeah.
in situ is better in the workplace. And also, there are times in everyone's lives where, yeah, it would be
Mhm.
a blessing to be able to go online and do that stuff. And the tech is there now in a way that it never ever was before.
Mhm.
So, of course, there are a lot of good things about it, but what you miss out for me
Mhm.
is to touch on a couple of things. What is the culture? How is it formed? Can you truly form that? Via a sort of 16:9 ratio window into the working environment. It's very different. It's almost like if you've ever looked at one of those critiques of Instagram photographs, that people take, and
Mhm.
it's like Instagram, the snap, the photo, or even the video, reality, and of course, just round the corner are it's the rubbish and the crowds and all the rest of it, and so it's framed in a certain way, and the smaller the frame within which you look into that culture, and indeed the dynamics of an organization, the power, the cliques or lack thereof, the less resolution you have. You have
Mhm.
a more binary perspective on it. And yeah, you can get people in, you can do the team days, you can do let's build the Eiffel Tower out of matchsticks and all that sort of stuff. Probably don't do that these days. I never did, but you know what I mean. Um, and that I think is fake. It's
Yeah.
false, and it may be by accident entirely accurate, but it
Mhm.
also may be quite false. So where is that? Where is that culture? Where is that sense of belonging? This intergenerational thing, Rob. I'd like to pick up on that. What did
Mm.
you mean by that specifically?
Yeah. So I think people who are of a certain age, they never knew anything different until COVID. They working in the office was kind of what they did, and for many of them, actually, they quite enjoyed it. Of course, if you were doing 5 days a week with a long commute, I totally get that. And
Hmm.
I had the luxury in the last few years before COVID of traveling, and therefore I could probably work from home 1 day a week anyway. So I wasn't 5 days a week on the train. But I sort of get that bit. But I guess where we're talking about intergenerational is that there is also a younger group of people that have never been in anything other than this hybrid or home working environment. And I think one thing that worries me is there's a lot of division, real or perceived, which social media certainly has sort of pulled together. And there's also seemingly an obsession in calling out all the different groups. The parents' generation being the boomers and the X's and the Y's and the millennials. And I don't think it's helpful because I don't think we need more labels. I think people know when someone's a bit older, a bit younger than that. I don't think they need to know that they were born between that time frame. And I think the intergenerational piece, as I say, can be divisive. And I think what you want to do in any organization is leverage the skills and the experience of all the people. I mean, I remember having a young intern working for me many years ago, and I learned so much from her because her perception and her viewpoint was so different. And the questions that they asked were incredible. And there were sometimes questions that we weren't asking around the management table and vice versa. When I was starting out in my career, I spent a lot of time with older people who were very experienced and were very generous with their time. So I think working in an office more regularly, and you're right, it doesn't have to go to the 5 day, but I think we're certainly in a strange place because, with the exception of some of those very big organizations that we all know about, and they're often American, they might be finance organizations, the pull is still very much the other way. And I think to have it more towards working in the office would, I think, mesh those generations better together. And I think then the value that would come from understanding about how that works in workforce would work well together. And it comes on to then the piece around ageism, which we've gone through a lot of great things with DEI over the last number of years. Generally, I mean, it has been brilliant for recognizing the diversity and the talent of rich perspectives and different perspectives. But I think ageism has kind of got stuck, and it's that invisible piece And I don't think the working from home helps, because I think you see those other people less, they become more invisible, and you don't know what you're missing out with. And I think, I was put forward for a role recently, Mike, and I went on the website to see the team because it was quite a small organization, and they were all of a certain age. And I didn't think that necessarily seemed what you'd want to be seeing in an organization, because it felt like there was nothing that you're leveraging from different backgrounds. And I think you look at, we often talk about the sports analogies, don't you? But I mean, there is value in having people with different tenures and different experiences and different skill sets. I think, so for me, home working is great. It's good for many aspects, but I think working in an office, you bring people together, you see the real value in the contribution of people. And I think intergenerationally, I think then those might become more blurred and actually become more irrelevant, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you said about, the diversity et al. Um, say push, and there's a lot of good come from that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, one of the ways I've always looked at it is that what you're looking for is you do need cohesive values. You need a
Mm,
set of values that at least overlap to a degree, because if the value set is way out there, and we see this time and time again in terms of cultures of a village, a town, a city, a country, or whatever. There are differences, and naturally, therefore, an organization, whether it be public, private sector, has a culture. So you've got to feel comfortable enough with that,
yeah.
or want to change it in hopefully a positive way. But the diversity ultimately, therefore, is in here.
Mm,
It's to do with how people think, again, in my opinion, because if you have that overlap of values and value set, in other words, if you're in an organization and you hate what the end product is, you can't stand it, it goes against your morals and ethics. If you possibly can, leave. You shouldn't be there. It's going to cause friction, pain, and angst all round. But
yeah.
presuming that someone is okay with the culture, the value set, then the difference that can enrich any given team or organization is the way that this individual thinks. And part of that has got to be, apart from, yes, how they were brought up, etc., what they did in life, is also that experience that comes with the length of time on the planet. And
Yeah.
we used to call that wisdom. And it's not to say that some people, when they get to whatever age it may be, for, old age of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, whatever,
Yeah.
it's not to say they will necessarily be wise, but within that group, that population of people who may be of a different older generation, there will almost certainly be at least some nuggets
Mm,
of information. And I think it's really a way of looking at things
mm,
that those other generations, those older generations can bring. And also, of course, the other way around that
of
can
course.
refresh those old ways of thinking. And that
Yeah.
mix to me sounds exciting. That mix
Mm,
sounds like that roiling of all those opinions, again, with a cohesive cultural match,
yeah.
can be the place when true innovation springs from. So yeah, I do think that is so terribly important. And
Mm,
also, I mean, again, when you were talking earlier, it got me thinking about this other thing about, let's say, working from home much more than used to happen. I
yeah.
wonder about true connection and trust.
Mm,
And I'll ask your opinion on this in a second, Rob. One of the reasons is that I keep on coming back to when I look at some of the leaders around these days, good, bad, indifferent. Maybe indifferent is bad, therefore, as well. But that's another story. So when we look at those leaders, the ones that fail, one of the reasons, apart from, potentially they're a bit directionless, or they just can't get buy-in from people, is trust, a lack
mm,
thereof that goes wrong. And that's often why they can't get buy-in. And I think trust is so important. It's so important that if you want to put your time into an organization, your time on the planet, you should
mm,
trust the people that are around. You should trust the leadership team.
Yeah.
And being physically in place, I would imagine, it certainly has for me, allows me to make that more refined assessment to say, well, is this a place that I do have a value match with, and are these people that I trust? And I wonder
Mm.
whether at a distance we find ourselves in a situation where we may be trusting and we shouldn't, or we really should be trusting, but we don't because once more, 16:9 ratio window into this multifaceted world. Anyway, what did I've rambled on a bit, Rob? I do apologize. What do you think about that in terms of culture, buy-in, trust?
Well, I do think, I mean, I think working together is the only way you build a culture. And I think, there's lots of reasons and lots of writings out there about why people work, and there's around the purpose and everything else. But equally, I think ultimately people work for people, and the
Hmm.
good manager, the good boss, the good mentor, the good coach, and the good teams. And I think if you don't have that ability to work together, then how on earth do you build? And you know many teams I've worked with, we work towards the high performance piece, and I know you've worked a lot with performance. How do you bring together a highly effective team and leverage that? And I think you don't get that without being together on a regular basis. And as I say, it doesn't have to be 5 days a week, but it needs to be the regular thing. Is this is where we come to work, this is where we get stuff done, this is where we celebrate success. And I don't think you get that on multiple teams calls. There was a time when I had to spend a lot of time going through a restructure in my old organization, and we did almost all the meetings remotely, and quite forgetting the personal piece to having difficult conversations. Even the planning discussions, which could have been pretty enjoyable in some ways because they were quite stimulating intellectually, they weren't, because they were exhausting. They're much more exhausting in this dynamic, aren't they? There's definitely not the same creativity that you get either. So I do think the culture is built around being together, and it's interesting, isn't it, how so many other high performance cultures, whether I know often business does look at sport, and I know there's an organization that you're aware of that works with businesses, looking at comparing that work to a rowing team. And I know Dave Brailsford and sort of the cycling team became a sort of a model for how you would look at sort of improving everything you did, and looking at every aspect of really every day to say, can it make things improve in some way? I don't think business is often smart enough to understand that, and I think so. The culture is lost, I think, if you don't have that meshing together of people. And the final thing I was going to say is, informally or otherwise, there's a lot of mentoring that goes on in the workplace, and I think that gets lost too. And for me, a culture only survives if it's continually being strengthened and reinforced by those linkages and relationships. And it doesn't stand still, but equally it needs nurturing, doesn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't touch on that at all, and yet when you say it, it just again resonates loudly with
Mm,
me that it is part of that ability to have those in the corridor, informal
mm,
chat and create those relationships out of which could spring, or again, it may be more a formal process. Sometimes it's a bit of both.
sure.
The mentoring, the coaching, the development,
Mm,
the person who you can trust to just be yourself with and get an honest opinion from. And
yeah,
once more, if it's only been online. Now, I know some people will say, ah, yeah, but I built up some great relationships and friendships online. So have I. I
yeah, yeah,
totally understand that. And maybe it takes longer, maybe it doesn't. My experience, it takes a little bit longer. It can be done, but
yeah,
how often do we say in those situations we must grab a cup of coffee together sometime? It would be great to meet up, meaning in person. And
yeah,
I come back to that, as you've said, it's not binary, it's not never working at a distance, and it's not always in an office. But it seems that the ratio would benefit, or perhaps more focus given to the need to really find ways to bring people together. And I
yeah,
would add, probably to do just the day-to-day stuff. yeah, team building and all that is great, but if it's only an event and then working from
Mm.
home is better than nothing. But I think it's in the quotidien. I know you're fluent in French, so you won't understand what I said because I mangled the pronunciation. But
Yeah,
it's the
yeah,
daily stuff. It's the day to
yeah.
day. What do you think of all that, Rob?
Well, I'm not going to speak in French, but no, I think it is that. I think it is the seeing those colleagues every day and connecting with them every day. And yes, you might have a few minutes talking about the terrible traffic or your journey in, but equally there's that sense of participation and and just touching on the piece around you know commutes being awful. Well, organizations, they've been creative anyway. I think they can go towards the core hours, so you can maybe miss out the most tortuous times on those motorways or the most expensive times on the trains, but have those core hours in a day. So, to your point, doesn't it have to be binary even from one day to the next? It can just be there are 6 hours today when we'll be together, or 4 hours when we'll be together, but we won't have this craziness that you'll be remote for 5 days a week, and then once a fortnight we'll come together because we'll have a pizza party or something. I think that would be um, not the way to build that culture. So I'm not sure if I'm really following your question completely, but I think it is daily, and it's getting built on each day, isn't it? I think it's culture is something you do have to take a long time to create. I think there was something going around on social media saying, I think someone got asked about a culture change and said, how long will it take? And I think the individual said, well, probably will take 15 years. And of
Mm.
course, the response wasn't very positive because they obviously wanted immediate change, but the recognition was that's probably how long it would take to change. But it doesn't mean you don't make little incremental changes day by day. But to make that massive shift, maybe it could take that time. I mean, depending how toxic that culture was previously. But I think if you've got a half decent culture, then I think you've got to nurture it, haven't you? With whatever analogy you want to use, whether it's a growing or whatever, it does need that. So
Yeah, and you got me thinking as well that some people listening to this may be saying, I don't care. And I think it's fair to recognize those people and to
sure,
say that, of course, is an extremely valid position to have about work.
yeah,
Because some people will say, I don't care about the culture. I don't care about the gossip. I don't care about finding out what's coming on down the line and who said what and why. I just want to do that bit of work, get paid for it, and I'm really glad not to get involved in any of that office stuff. And of course, one has got to recognize that individuals such as those, I couldn't give a percentage, but no doubt there are quite a few
mm,
individuals such as those
yeah,
are going to benefit.
sure,
And long may they be able to benefit from such a situation. What I would
yeah,
also say is that there are also a lot of people for whom getting up, the ritual, going to work, even just getting into the work gear and interacting is a lifesaver. And
yes,
if you've never had that, you might not recognize, in fact, you probably wouldn't, therefore, how beneficial that can be. If it's toxic, opposite effect, of course.
of course.
Hence, I always talk about the need for good leadership, but that's another story. So if it's nourishing in some ways, it can be exceptionally good for psychological and physiological health.
Mm,
If if someone is working from home and is quite mercenary, then it may suit them. But there are people, and I worry about these individuals who don't know how good it can be when it is good. And when it's
yeah.
good, that nourishing factor can be epic and immense. And if we miss out on that going forward, I just think in oh so many different ways, including benefits to the organization, of course,
Mm,
we're missing out. And it seems sad that we would ever find ourselves in a situation where it was almost always from home. Of course, there'll be businesses it can't be by the nature of it. But I hope the trend is going back the way that the pendulum has swung a little bit further towards
yeah,
let's meet IRL as we say in real life in person.
yeah, yeah. No, I fully agree. At the end of the day, there'll be people that will never go back to the office, and there'll probably be an element of if you've got a very particular set of skills, then maybe you can leverage that and say, look, I won't come back, and if you need me, then these are my terms. But I think the vast majority would really value it, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the mental health piece we haven't touched on because we're not here to talk about that in huge detail today. But I think
Mm,
there is something huge about your well-being, being in another environment, being in a community. Many more people today live on their own than ever. And if you are spending your whole day basically online with colleagues, yes, but online and living on your own, then that's not a sustainable thing to do. But also, I think it's just not healthy to be in that one environment. I know the proverbial cold shower in the morning and going to the office early might feel painful, but actually the benefits are huge. And I agree. I think if you've never had it, you maybe don't know what you're missing out on. You think, well, it suits me. I can do what I like. I can do my gym class. I can do that. I can still put in my work. It's outputs, isn't it? So therefore, it's fine. And you're absolutely right. It is outputs, but I think it's still then looking at life in a very very narrow way, and maybe people don't always want that, and there will be people that don't. But I think if you want to nurture yourself more broadly, then I think you would see the value of being in the office and what comes from that. And as I say, for me, it was never about the gossip, but it was around you would learn more. You would just learn more, and
mm.
but also you built rapport. I mean, particularly
Yeah,
those people you didn't get on with as instantly, and you had
yeah,
maybe you took a while to adapt to. You had a moment to sort of speak to them as human beings before they got into that very task focused approach
yeah,
and how they
yeah,
would
yeah,
conduct the meeting or be in that meeting. So I think
yeah.
it just breaks down barriers, doesn't it?
It
But you've got to
does.
understand the value of what you're missing out on before you can maybe
Yeah.
accept there's value in going in. Yeah.
Yeah, you can make lifelong friends, people that you might never have met otherwise, and also you can learn tolerance and the ability to deal with people who are difficult. These are good life skills. And if
Yeah.
you then ultimately become someone who is in a position of influence and authority, whether it's manager, leader, whatever you want to call it, supervisor, then those skills are useful. If everything is transactional in nature, and I know some people would say, yeah, that's how I think. Who cares? Get stuffed. That's not
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
that there is an emotional content for a lot of people, and managed correctly, organizations, teams, businesses can be extremely nourishing. And I think that nourishment can come, at least in part, from being physically in the same space and place. And so yeah, I will come back to what you said at the beginning, Rob. I totally agree with all of that. I'm also aware that we're running out of time because I know you've got to dash to a meeting,
Yes, I have. Thank you.
and I did promise I would time keep. So maybe we'll revisit some of those things, mental
Yeah.
health and toxicity and stuff, another time. But Rob, let me just let you dash off, but say thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it, and hopefully
Pleasure,
we'll
Mike.
catch up again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Many thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye for now.